Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time I got a question that, yes, is about the Acolyte, and I think some of you out there might be already a little tired of hearing about this show and want something a little different, but it does, I think, lead to an interesting discussion that isn't only about the show, or maybe I should say goes a little beyond it. Anyway, the question comes to us from Mither, who asked, "Hey Thor, what is your opinion on the following Leslie Headland quote? I liked the idea of a faction of Force-sensitive beings who use the Force in a way that the Jedi might consider dark side, or potentially the dark side, but that the audience didn't really feel like it was something to judge or something that stirs up conflict. I hope that when you see it, you feel inspired and affected by them. You feel that they earned that power." For me, this quote confirms that for Headland, the witches are good and the Jedi are a bunch of corrupt space police. It was given in a short interview for a Mexican magazine. The comment then goes on to give the quote in Spanish, as well as a link to the article that I will try to remember to put in the description below, so you can just click on it if you want to read it. And as someone who doesn't speak or read Spanish very well, I'm going to assume or operate under the assumption that this translation is accurate. If you are fluent in Spanish, by all means let me know if it is indeed accurate. But again, for the sake of this video, I'm going to assume that it is. And what I immediately find curious, yeah, let's use that word. I could go with some other words, but we'll use curious. But what I find curious is that she basically seems to be acknowledging that she's intentionally framing the witches and the Jedi a certain way in order to make the Jedi potentially look bad, or at the very least make the witches look good or sympathetic to the viewer, regardless of whether they actually are or not, regardless of if any of it about either the Jedi or the witches is true or not, regardless if they are using the dark side or not, or just seem to be. She's kind of saying she doesn't want to present both sides equally, or present all the facts fairly from both perspectives and then let you decide who is right or who is wrong with all the evidence, as much as she wants to present things in a way that makes you come to a particular conclusion about the witches, again, independent of what the truth may or may not be, which you could argue is her choice or right as the storyteller, that she gets to decide what thoughts and or feelings she wants to try and evoke in the viewer. But Star Wars isn't exactly her story. She may have, or certainly has been, given permission to tell this story by those who own it today, and that is all well and good, I suppose. If this is what Disney and Lucasfilm are okay with Star Wars being used for, then that is completely up to them. It's their money, their franchise, and they can do whatever they want with it, and plenty of fans have decided not to spend their money on Star Wars because of shows like this, because of what they have decided to do with it. And as someone who has loved and appreciated the story of Star Wars long before the current owners ever got their hands on it, who finds it frustrating to see how many people out there feel the Jedi are, even before this show came along, that they are the bad guys in the story, that they are in the wrong with almost everything they do, with some even going so far as to do things like quoting Palpatine to make their case. To quote some of his lines like how good is a point of view, apparently not understanding he's the bad guy in the story, and he is constantly lying to try and manipulate Anakin and pretty much everyone else when he says things like that. And apparently also not understanding that the prequels show how you can and that you shouldn't become complacent, that you must always be vigilant for the return of evil, and that when you're not, that evil will worm its way back in and corrupt and manipulate things, and that even the Jedi, even after 1,000 generations of being the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy, even they can fail and fall if they let their guard down, which they did after all that time. This is not saying the Jedi were flawed all along, it is saying those Jedi failed. Anyway, because of my appreciation for the stories George Lucas once told with Star Wars, I would be remiss not to talk about how this show thus far, and based off this quote, it seems to be intentionally painting the Jedi who are the heroes of the overall story, but it is painting them in a rather villainous way, all the while painting those who have potentially done evil or used the dark side, as even Headland acknowledges. It is painting them in a good or positive light, painting them as the heroes or victims of the story, you could even say, without ever bothering to tell us what they may or may not have actually done. You're trying to make me root and care for evil by framing things a certain way and by being intentionally vague. And you're doing that in or with Star Wars of all things. And one of my main problems with the show thus far is indeed how vague it's been, especially when it comes to the witches. Maybe they really aren't all that bad, I don't know. Maybe they are truly victims. But I can't and won't make that judgment either way because I don't have enough to base a decision on. And I am not going to let my feelings or emotions on the matter guide the way. That is the dark side. All I do know with certainty thus far is that, and Mother Anastasia even says this, that they have been hunted to near extinction because what they do, their beliefs and way of life, and potentially actions they have taken against others, is perceived to be dark and unnatural. We also know there is a law in place that prevents them from training children to use the Force. And, well, why is that the case? Why has all that happened to them? Again, I would need to know if there is any justification in what has been done to them or not, long before I can decide whether or not I should be sympathetic towards them and see them as victims of the Jedi and or Republic. You cannot just show me the good parts of them. You can't just show me one peaceful day in their lives that gets interrupted by the Jedi who demand to test and train their children, and tell me virtually nothing else about them, no other context, and expect me to be sympathetic towards them when even they have acknowledged there is something they do that some again see as dark or unnatural. And you do need to keep in mind this is all taking place or set in a galaxy where evil is a literal, tangible thing that does exist. To me, that feels like you're being intentionally deceptive to make me feel a certain way against the Jedi and potentially sympathetic towards evil of all things. And again, you're doing this in Star Wars, in a franchise that many have seen and enjoyed as the battle and triumph of good over evil. And let me now give you a sort of example of what I'm talking about here in case I'm not being clear why I have an issue with this approach to a story, because I don't have an issue with perhaps presenting the Jedi as a little aggressive, and that yes, the witches are the victim in this. But in order to do that properly, you would have to give me the full context so that again, I can come to an educated conclusion. And so here is a hypothetical situation which maybe makes my point better, I hope anyway. Let's say you take someone who has never seen anything Star Wars before, and at best only has a very, very basic knowledge of it, mainly coming from pop culture references. They know Vader is Luke's father and all that sort of stuff. What conclusion do you think they'd come to about Palpatine and him becoming Emperor? And I hope we can all agree he is arguably the most evil guy in the history of Star Wars, or one of them. He's top 10 at the very least. But what conclusion would someone with virtually no knowledge of Star Wars come to about him if you showed them the prequel trilogy, but you edited out anything shady we see Palpatine doing, or that hinted at or directly showed him being a Sith Lord? Basically, you are only seeing Palpatine as the earnest and sincere politician who loves democracy and wants to save the Republic, and even seems a little pained to take those emergency powers on, the ones he promises to lay down after this crisis has abated. You're also seeing him as a father figure to Anakin who cares a great deal about this young man and tries to offer him advice and understanding when it comes to all of his problems that the Jedi don't seem to care about. And we can even edit out anything that paints the Jedi in a positive light. We will portray them as harsh and cruel towards Anakin as we possibly can, and doing it for no reason. And then we will have the film or trilogy basically end with the attempted arrest of Palpatine, but not after showing the scene where he reveals himself as a Sith Lord to Anakin. Instead, we again cut anything like that out and just have the Jedi show up and arrest him because they say he's done bad things. Things we have not seen a single hint of. In fact, again, we've only seen him presented as good, but they will say, we have to arrest you because you are doing bad and unnatural things. You are a Sith Lord, but we've seen no evidence of it. We'll then skip that little part where Palpatine whips out a lightsaber and kills 3 of the Jedi and skip to, well, we'll skip to where Anakin comes in and sees Windu with him with frail old Palpatine at the end of a lightsaber about to be killed. We'll also then edit out all that unlimited power stuff he says and how he fries Windu with lightning. We'll just show Anakin saving Palpatine from Windu after an entire trilogy of again never showing Palpatine doing anything wrong and only showing the Jedi doing questionable things and claiming Palpatine has done something bad, but being very, very vague about what that bad thing even is. It was something they'll claim was dark and unnatural, but we have no details, we've never really seen it. And then after all that, not that, mind you, the movies would even make a whole lot of sense anymore, But after all that, we will see Palpatine proclaim himself Emperor to safeguard the galaxy, to protect it from the Jedi. And then the credits will roll, and we'll ask that person who watched all of this without any prior Star Wars knowledge, we'll ask them, how do you feel about Palpatine? Do you think he'll make a good Emperor? And what about those Jedi? Pretty evil bastards, aren't they? And this is what I feel like the Acolyte is potentially doing. Now, of course, not quite to this extreme, but Headland's comments even seem to say that, yes, this is intentionally what she is doing here. She is intentionally trying to frame it a certain way. She wants you to feel sympathetic for the witches without, thus far, showing any real reason why we shouldn't feel sympathetic for them, because we haven't been shown anything against them. In fact, they're simply presented as misunderstood or being persecuted without any real reason, just like Palpatine would be in my hypothetical version of the prequels. Furthermore, and going back to the quote from Headland, she said that, I hope that when you see it, you feel inspired and affected by them. You feel they earned that power. And I do wonder if this is maybe not translated particularly well, because that's a kind of a strange quote. But again, I'm assuming it is accurate, or accurate for the most part, if not a perfect translation. But power is not earned, or shouldn't be earned, because you feel sorry for someone. I would argue, to kind of put a twist on the classic Uncle Ben line from Spider-Man, but I would argue power can only be earned by being responsible, or it should only be bestowed upon those who have proven they'll very likely use it responsibly due to previous actions, and it should also be taken away from those who abuse it. And we know these witches do have power. We have seen them wield that power. We have seen them use the thread, which even they acknowledge is just another name for the Force, or how they see and interpret the same thing. But again, the problem is we don't know how they have used it in the past. We don't know what they did to get the attention of the Jedi and the Republic and get them punished. And without that information, I'm not going to trust my feelings and say they have earned power. That's kind of ridiculous to say. I mean, I want to know why they can't train children, and just how does a coven of all-female witches repopulate, if you will? And sure, this is Star Wars. There could be all types of scientific answers, like cloning, for example, that could explain how they could, again, repopulate without men, or something along those lines. Again, there could be a lot of answers. Though that said, it could be something more nefarious. We've even seen other clans of witches, the Night Sisters, who essentially keep men simply for breeding purposes. Or maybe they kidnap children and indoctrinate them. Who knows? All we do know is that in this particular instance with the twins, Mother Anastasia has done something to make them that the Jedi would not be happy about. And since we have no real idea what that is, it could just be that it's the Jedi being irrational, not that she has actually used the dark side and done something truly evil. And in this odd sort of way, though I don't think this is her intent, but Leslie Headland is highlighting one of the greatest problems of the modern world. This is quite the commentary on the modern world, as a matter of fact. Because we are all too often not presented with the facts, the raw and simple facts, and then told to come to our own conclusion. We are first presented with a narrative someone wants us to believe, and then only given the facts that fit that narrative, or the facts are skewed, so that we will come to the desired conclusion of someone else. And though, again, maybe this didn't translate well, I don't know, and maybe things will be different after we have seen all 8 episodes, I don't want to make a final judgment without all the evidence I can get my hands on. But again, based off this quote, based off what she said and what we have seen thus far, it doesn't seem like she's all too interested in this being a fair assessment of the witches and the Jedi Order. It seems like this is her trying to paint the Jedi negatively and the witches positively, despite what the actual facts of the matter might be. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about what she had to say. Or you can always ask a question for a future lightning response video. All you gotta do is start your comment off with "Hey Thor" and then ask away. But whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.